والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم. رب زدني علما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون. إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء في الخمر والميسر ويصدكم عن ذكر الله وعن الصلاة فهل أنتم منتهون. وأطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول واحذروه فإن توليتم فاعلموا أنما على رسولنا البلاغ المبين. صدق الله مولانا العظيم. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the muharramat. Previously we cannot consider halal which is haram and haram which is halal, and here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions some of the ummahat al-khaba'ith, the mothers of the filthy and despicable and repugnant actions. And again, beginning with such an important narrative, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls out to the people of Iman with this theme: O you people of Iman, ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you people who have believed, who have adopted Iman, innamal khamru, that verily, definitely, and it is only that khamr, which is wine, basically, literally it means in something, khamr, when it becomes, it ferments and it becomes an intoxicant. And it's also called khamr because yukhamid al-aql, it also covers up the intelligence, and therefore you find people of high intelligence and a very high repute, but when they take these intoxicants, they act as though they have lost their minds altogether. And this is what it does. So verily the wine, and of course the fuqaha have said, well, anything which has this effect on the mind, and it alters the state of mind and causes human beings to act in repugnant ways, in lewd ways, and they lose their equilibrium. All types of drugs, intoxicants, all that have this effect, they all come under this classification. Khamr wal maisir. Maisir basically is gambling, all forms of gambling, which is a billion-dollar industry, of course, as we know, and all haram. Well, ansab basically means nusub. Nusub is something which is put up, sort of stood up as a sort of a monument, or sort of a something which is either worshipped itself, or some of these nusub, they used to be these rocks that they used to have around the Kaaba, and these sort of idols, and they used to worship those. They used to also offer sacrifices at these idols, at these nusub, at these stones which had been set upright in these places. And of course, this is the filth of all filths, the abomination of all abominations. Well, azlam basically, zulam is these arrows. They used to have these, what they call the divining arrows. They used to consult these arrows before they would embark on various things. Sometimes these arrows would have yes, no, and then they would throw them, and then if it says yes, for example, they want to go on a journey, it says yes, okay, they go. It says no, we won't go. They also used to have the original thing was actually what they did was they had these azlam, they were actually in the Kaaba, and in fact they had a picture in the Kaaba of Ibrahim and Ismail alayhim salam, and they had in their hand these divining arrows, like they were doing these kind of things. A'udhu billah. So of course, although it was cleaned out of the Kaaba when Nabi alayhi salam came after the Fath Makkah, and all this was cleared and cleaned away. So what they used to do was they would have 10 arrows. 7 of those arrows they would write a particular number, and what they would do is when they would slaughter a camel, between 10 people, for example, and those 10 people would all draw the arrows, and whoever got whatever arrow, he would get that many portions. And some people wouldn't get anything at all. So why not you just give everybody an equal portion? Anyway, they had their own skewed perception of doing things which Shaitan had actually mentored them in doing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says these are rijs. Rijs is basically filth, impure, nasty, abominable, repugnant. Rijsu min amr shaitan. Now, mind you, these intoxicants and gambling and these divining arrows, they've all been linked also. They've been gathered together along with ansab, and ansab basically is a sort of a symbol of idolatry. So these, very serious offenses are, you could say to an extent, they are a par with idolatry, even though idolatry is the one thing which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never forgives, and these others Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may or may not forgive. But nevertheless, their impact, is extremely serious. And in fact, it's mentioned that the person in various riwayats, the person who takes intoxicants is akin to the person who worships idols. Because what happens is that these intoxicants lead you to all of these, filthy things, and it can lead ultimately to kufr itself. So these are filthy, repugnant, evil actions which have been initiated and instructed and taught to human beings by Satan. Amal shaitans, from the actions of Shaitan. He's the one who has mentored human beings into doing so, as he's the avowed enemy and wants to bring all of them into the fire of Jahannam along with him. So he's facilitated them through these actions. Fajtanibu, so leave it. Cease and desist. La'allakum tuflihun, that perhaps you will succeed. The perhaps, of course, as we mentioned from time to time, it's from our side. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no perhaps, He will do, definitely. But the perhaps is from us. If perhaps we do it, then we would definitely be successful by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fajtanibu. Now this is an order which came after what we call a tadrij fit tashriya. So the order of particularly the leaving of intoxicants, which was part of their daily routine. I mean, the Arabs used to drink intoxicants the way we drink tea and coffee. I mean, they would start the day with a drink. In fact, they used to start the battle with a drink. Even up until Uhud, still it had not been prohibited. And some of the shuhada of Sahaba, that was the practice, before entering into the battle, a little, sort of preparation drink, to loosen themselves up or whatever. But that was their habit. They used to have a morning drink called sabur, and they would have a drink later in the, so different times of the day they had different names. So it was a very, established practice. It was like drinking water or tea or coffee for them. So to prohibit this all in one go would have failed miserably, just as it failed here in the United States, and we talked about that perhaps previously. Prohibition, which was, they came to the conclusion here in the United States that, yes, they also came to the same conclusion. This is a very nasty habit. It's destroying society, the individual, the family, the society at large. So prohibit it, but without the Quranic methodology, which is to prepare the hearts and the minds and motivate the people so that they realize that whatever is going to come in terms of injunctions is in their best interest. Well, that wasn't done, and it failed miserably. However, here, this is the final injunction regarding wine. First, it's mentioned that, this is maybe something that's not in your best interest. Then don't attend salat when you are intoxicated. So they used to have to wait until they became sober, then pray, and then do. And then finally, the final injunction, the final order to leave it altogether. La'allakum tuflihun. And it's very interesting that when this injunction came, whoever heard it, he implemented it. At that moment, somebody had it in his mouth, he was drinking, and it was mentioned, wine is for, he would spit it. Somebody had it in his hand, he was about to drink, he threw the glass. Somebody had in their house. Everybody had in their houses. So all the houses were, depositing, throwing out the wine into the streets. They say the streets, the gullies, of Medina were flowing with wine like rivers. They just threw it out immediately. Even one caravan, they say, was coming from Syria. The whole caravan was wine. Somebody was coming out and met the caravan and said, "You don't know that wine has been prohibited." Oh yeah. Fellow took out his knife and just slashed all these, leather bags full of the wine. Can you imagine that? His whole capital, his whole, principle and capital and profit all sunk into the sand. Now, if it would have been us, we'd say, "Wait a minute, hang on, let's go to the mufti and see kuch na kuch hal," Right? That wasn't their mode of thinking. Their mode of thinking was لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, that you will succeed. You leave this and succeed. Well, we want to succeed. Leave it to the max. And that's, that was their hearts and their mindsets. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us that. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains, you see, not just legislating, but explaining, motivating, preparing the mind's heart, and explaining the wisdom. إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقي بينكم العداوة والبغضاء. Al-Shaytan, who is your enemy, this is a trick of his, where he wants to place in your hearts and in your minds animosity, enmity. Adawa والبغضاء, hatred, animosity, and people get, drink. When I was before I accepted Islam, and I was in Morocco. It was very funny. So I had joined up with a group of musicians. I was previously a musician, right? So I joined up with a group of Moroccan musicians. Now musicians, they do what they do everywhere. And so we used to have these engagements in the night, and we used to, one type of engagement would be for the military. These military guys would have a party and they would drink and we would play the music, and then they would get drunk and they would start fighting and brawling. Otherwise these are people who are running the military, but after a few drinks, then they can't even, they can't even collaborate among themselves. But the very interesting thing was, the big takeaway from that was, so they would start fighting, outright brawl, and then someone would say, "Sallu ala Rasulillah. Salat ala Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala sayyidina." And then they would start to cry and they would kiss and hug one another and make up and patch up, and then they'd start up the music and the drinking again, and then again, rinse and repeat. There'd be another fight and this would go on, So, obviously, this is what happens, people who are otherwise, and so many of these killings and so many of these, just putrid acts that are totally animalistic, satanic, people do, and then they come out of their drunken stupor. How did I do that? How did you do that? Well, your enemy got you to, engage in, covering up and destroying your mind, and so therefore this is what happens. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains to us, Shaitan this is what he wants to do. He wants to put enmity, he wants to put hatred, and cause you and the loss of aql, so you're going to do terrible things. You're going to kill one another, you're going to maim one another, etc. Usurp others' rights. And also in gambling, both in intoxicants and gambling. And we don't need to go into a long discussion of that. We're all aware of what goes on in Las Vegas and all these casinos and what happens. And also in my musical career, that was another venue that we used to frequent. And so I used to see straight, firsthand all of those evils. And by the time I was 20 years old, I had enough of that. I said, leave it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save me from all of that. Okay. So Satan wants to not only do that, and that is social, maladies and bring about social discord, but more importantly, and perhaps even more detrimentally, وَيَصُدُّكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَعَنِ الصَّلَاةِ. And furthermore, Satan uses these tricks to deviate you and divert you from the remembrance of Allah, and the most important remembrance of Allah, salat itself. فَهَلْ أَنْتُم مُنْتَهُونَ? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks, so are you going to leave it? After I've explained to you how terrible this is, how it's destroying your life here, it's destroying your life in the next world. Are you going to leave it? So the intelligent person is going to say, Labbaik ya Rabb. Right. Hadir. I am here at your service. And that's what our whole life is about. Islam is about submission. So would you leave it? And so the Sahaba, they all rejoined that absolutely, and they practically manifested that they would totally put that injunction into practice. Again, the wisdom of the Quran, the Quranic methodology, to bring about legislation which totally succeeds. وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ. And further, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes, obey Allah and obey His Rasul. وَاحْذَرُوا. Be careful. Be careful of our enemies, outward enemies, shaitan, inward enemies, nafs, society, bad habits that we've acquired from our previous practices. Be careful and be aware, be cognizant, take heed. فَإِن تَوَلَّيْتُمْ. And if it so happens that you turn your backs and don't fulfill these orders, then إِنَّمَا عَلَى رَسُولِنَا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ. Upon our messengers only to give the clear warning and give the clear injunctions and to deliver the message. And if you follow, it's better for you. And if you don't, it will not have any impact on his status, but it will moreover be a detriment to you who turns away. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to understand, the great bounty of Islam and the great bounty of showing us a lifestyle of purity and prosperity, and save us from all of these filths which have become prevalent in society once again. وبالله سبحانه وتعالى التوفيق وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله